This week, we're going to explore music and opera. Now, music is not my strongest area in the humanities, but there is a playlist under this week's module. After reviewing the lecture, I encourage you to take some time and explore the playlist and the different musical styles on your own. Most of this lecture will focus on music. There are many types of music, but there are three common subtypes: classical, jazz, and pop. Much like the visual arts, an audience can appreciate music without being able to create it or recognize its different elements. However, having some background does help, as does broadening your exposure to music. So let's start by discussing composition and terminology. Some of this terminology probably looks familiar, as we used some of it when discussing 2- and 3-dimensional art. We have sound, which is made up of pitch, dynamics, timbre or tone color, and duration. We have rhythm, which includes beat, meter, and tempo. Next, we have melody, harmony, and tonality. Finally, there is texture, which includes monophony, polyphony, and homophony. We'll start with sound, but before we do, take a moment to pause the video and consider what is the difference between sound and noise. So sound and noise can be the same thing, but not always. Spore writes that sound is anything that excites the auditory nerve. Sounds can be both good and bad. Noise can be another word for a sound, but it is sound that is inconsistent. It lacks shape and composition. Noise tends to be spontaneous and startling. Think of a child screaming or a glass shattering on the floor. For sound to become music, it requires 4 elements: pitch, dynamics, timbre, and duration. Here I have a copy of some promotional art from Pitch Perfect. The different actresses help represent the range within pitch. Spore writes that pitch is the relative highness or lowness of a sound. It is a physical phenomenon that is measurable in vibrations per second. It involves 2 levels of frequency, high and low. Faster frequency means higher pitch, and slower frequency means lower pitch. Scale is the organization of frequencies, and this is often affected by culture and time. Dynamics refer to the loudness and softness of the sounds. Think about the difference between a soft pitter-patter of raindrops compared to a downpour. The downpour has a louder and stronger dynamic than does the pitter-patter. Timbre is the tone color of the sounds. It's a difference in the quality of tones produced by the same source. Duration is the length of time vibration continues without interruption. Within a composition, notations, notes, and rests affect the duration of the sound produced. Next, we have rhythm, and I have the album cover to Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation here for you. The video for Rhythm Nation itself illustrates rhythm through the movements of Janet Jackson and her backup dancers. Rhythm is all about patterns through beat, meter, and tempo. The beats are the individual pulses that we hear. Meter is made up of clusters of beats, and tempo refers to the speed of the composition. Now that we know what sound is in relation to music, let's discuss what happens when sounds are put together to create melody, harmony, and tonality. Melody is a succession of sounds with rhythmic and tonal organization. It can be a tune, theme, or a motif, but it doesn't have to be. How the music is organized or played determines whether a melody can be a tune or if it can be sung, a theme, which refers to if it has a centralized idea throughout the piece, or motif. And a motif is a short melodic or rhythmic idea that a composer may design a composition. Harmony refers to when multiple tones are played together at the same time. These tones can be played in intervals and chords. Tonality refers to a central sound, often a key, from which the music originates and returns. Musical texture differs from a visual texture. Musical texture is heard, and there are three types of textures. The first, monophony, is single lines of music without accompaniment. Next, polyphony is multiple lines of music performing simultaneously. Finally, homophony occurs when chords accompany one main melody. For each of these terms, pay attention to the prefixes. Mono means one, poly means many, and homo means same. Now that we have an overview of the different elements of sound and music, let's discuss the types of music. There are many types of music, but they often fall under one of three categories: classical, jazz, and pop. For each of these portions, I have created a mini playlist for you to peruse after the PowerPoint, or you can pause and listen between slides. The playlist also includes an opera at the end. Let's begin with classical. This form of music has been around for centuries, and it revolves around a set of standards and principles. There are many subcategories that fall under classical. Mass is a sacred music often played during church services. Cantata includes a soloist and instrumental accompaniment. It originated with the Lutheran Church during the Baroque period. Oratorio also uses a soloist, an instrumental accompaniment, and it is meant to tell a story, but without theatrical elements, like setting, lighting, costume, and acting. Art song is essentially a poem set to music. Spore writes that it adapts the poem's mood and imagery into music. Art song grew out of the Romantic style of the 19th century. Fugue is a musical form that is a polyphonic composition based on one main theme. Fugal form is extremely flexible as it includes a singular constant in the beginning, but the theme is then manipulated throughout the remainder of the song. Symphony is a larger orchestral work that lasts 20 or more minutes, and it's conducted in 4 movements. Finally, a concerto is a performance for an instrumental soloist and an orchestra. Concertos will normally last between 20 and 45 minutes, but can last longer. Jazz music was originally performed before it was written or recorded. It was improvised and spontaneous. It originates from various cultures, but much of its structure comes from traditional West African music. It has many subcategories. The blues is the more melancholy of the jazz forms. It started popping up at the end of the 19th century with the abolition of slavery. New Orleans style typically has a march or church melody as its base. This style gave way to swing music. Ragtime is piano music played with syncopation, which is unexpected interruptions to the rhythm of a piece. It often takes a classical piece and changes it. Free jazz is characterized by its abstract, disjointed, and chaotic nature. It's a product of improvisation. Fusion is a form of jazz that's a mix of jazz and rock. And groove is a newer iteration of jazz that is often called funk. This form represents the international appeal of jazz, and it pays homage to jazz's original forms. Pop is music that has sprung from popular culture. Often the different types of pop music are separated from it, and there are attempts to separate it from two of its dominant subgroups, which are rock and rap. But technically, both rock and rap and other genres like punk, techno, and R&B fall under pop. Spore describes rock and roll as having a pounding, rhythmic, accenting the first beat of the measure. It is loud, intense, coarse, and fast in tempo, with an obvious sexuality in its sound and lyrics. He describes rap music as being focused on ideas of violence, anger, and aggression, and featured half-spoken lyrics and strong, complex rhythms. But I find both of these definitions to be very limiting. I want you to keep in mind that this course and the text comprise a very brief survey of the musical forms, and these lists are not inclusive. Be aware that much of the material is generalized. The definitions may not apply to all types of music that fall within that category. I will wrap up the lecture with some notes on opera. Opera includes not only music, but the visual arts, literature, and acting. It's fitting that it comes somewhere in the middle of what we'll discuss throughout the semester. In opera, everything is presented through song, and there's little to no regular speaking. There are 4 types of opera: grand opera, opera comique, opera buffa, operetta, and I want to make a note about musicals, which are sometimes confused for operas. Operas and musicals share much in common, but have one very specific difference. In a musical, the story is revealed through spoken lines that are broken up with song. In opera, everything, or almost everything, is revealed through music. Grand opera is a traditional opera. It emerged with opera in Europe in the 16th century. It includes 5 acts and it includes a serious plot. And there's often a central hero. Opera comique isn't quite a comedy, but it's more lighthearted. It includes a mix of music and spoken dialogue, but the dialogue is limited. This form originated in the 18th century France. Opera buffa is a comic opera, but it shouldn't be confused with opera comique. It is satirical, meaning that it takes a serious issue with comedy. This form will not include speaking. Finally, an operetta is a lighter style of opera that can include some speaking. This form will include more theatrical elements like speaking than most operas, but not so much that it would be a musical. This is one of the shorter lectures this semester, so now I'd like you to have a look at the playlist. Pick a few songs that are new to you and enjoy. There are also listening selections for this week's discussion boards that you'll want to review.